All right, hello, science, stress, and well-being class. So today will be your first virtual lecture from me, Dr. Williams. We are going to talk about the psychology of stress. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, now the mind and soul. Now, if you see me looking this way, I have two computer screens in front of me. To thine own self be true. Very, very powerful quote. So chapter 6 talks about a psychology towards a psychology. All right, so this says modern man is sick because he is not whole. Carl Jung. But you can read. Here we go. Upon reading this chapter, now the lecture, there are a lot of theories in this chapter. So when you do your chapter quiz, you're going to see there's a lot of theories. I'm going to only focus on a few for this lecture. And then some of the other theorists in there, like Brene Brown, Maslow, we can talk about those in some of our other modules because we have a lot of more modules to do. So I want to kind of just not give you too much at one time because too much sometimes it's just too much, right? So I'm going to talk about some of those other theorists during some of our other modules that we have left. So for this one or for this lecture, I'm going to focus mainly on Freud, Victor's theory, and then Wayne Dyer's theory. Okay, so those are the three goals or three things that we're going to do for this specific lecture. All right, so the great debate is the mind and the brain similar? Is the mind a function of the brain chemistry or is the mind a complex dynamic of conscientious? Is it a separate entity until itself? So here, basically what the book says is this: as the mind-body connection is more closely examined with regard to the stress response, it becomes increasingly clear that the mind is a very complex phenomena and not merely a product or a byproduct of neurochemical interactions. Okay. So I feel like when I think about the brain is the physical, it's the physiology of the body, and the mind goes a little bit more deeper into the soul, the spirit, and how we use the brain, if that makes sense. Okay. All right. So the mind is the interaction of all these different things. It's your thoughts, it's your emotions, your behaviors, your personality traits, right? This all comes from up here, the mind. So, the focus of this chapter, we're going to look at how we perceive stress. So, how does the mind perceive some events as threatening, for an example? Or what cognitive dynamics are used to deal with psychological stressors? So, let's begin. All right. And if you see me take a brief pause, I'm just trying not to go super fast, okay? So, you're like, why is she stopping? Just taking a brief pause to take my time to get through the lecture. Freud and the egg. And I see what that means. Freud is known for your conscious versus your unconscious. So your conscious thought is simply, and we've talked about this is what you are aware of. Your unconscious is what you're really not aware of, what has not quite come to the surface. So sometimes there are behaviors there that people do, there are thoughts that people have that are still on a unconscious, or some people might say a subconscious level. All right. All right, let's try this again because it completely cut off on me in the middle of my recording. So here we go, starting back with Freud. All right, so Freud is known for the id, the ego, and the superego. These are the different parts of the personality. The id is the part of the personality that needs immediate gratification. So when you're hungry, when you need to feel, when you're sleepy, when you need sleep, right? So that part of the personality that needs immediate gratification. So think about the it is all we know at birth, right? A baby's personality is very basic. They sleep, they eat, they go to the bathroom. So very, very basic, right? But the ego, which is the next layer of the personality, seeks to gratify the needs of the ego, the needs of the id. So it has to balance between what the id needs and the reality of the external world. So in other words, how do you get those needs gratified, right? If you're hungry, how do you gratify that need of hunger? How do you gratify that need of sleep? For a baby, they begin to recognize really, really early how to get those needs met. If a baby cries enough, they make those neural connections. If they cry, the parent picks them up and soothes them. I cry, the parent picks me up and soothes them. They begin to make that neural connection. That is how they get their needs met. Okay? And then the superego, as we continue to evolve continue to evolve, that is the superego, is the subconscious. So that's the moral code that we want to kick in. So we all have needs that we have to gratify. We all understand that there's something in the external world that will gratify that. But there has to be a moral element that comes with that. So if I'm a person where, just say for an example, I've lost my job and now I don't have money, I need to feed my family. If I go out and rob a bank, that is not my superego. That is still my ego trying to satisfy those needs. But the superego says, okay, although I lost my job, I don't have any money, I got to feed my family. There's a moral code that kicks in, the superego that says I can't go out and rob a bank just to satisfy. I mean, I can, but it's not the moral thing to do. Okay? All right, so then here's this thing that we call, so you saw in where we started Freud, it said Freud and the egg. So what does that mean? So here's a diagram that is used to help us to understand this idea of the id and the ego. So it says Freud compared the abstract human psyche to an egg. Instinctual tension is always present. Freud believed because of the id constantly releases these impulses. So you see the arrows, these impulses, these are your needs. These along with the external stimuli external stimuli, those things that are coming in from the external world, threaten the integrity of the ego. So the ego then tries to protect itself using defense mechanisms. And we're going to go through those defense mechanisms next. So the purpose of the ego is to do a few things. Is to protect us against any threat. Okay. It is also to help us increase pleasure. So remember, we talked about the ego, the id, baby, is hungry. They need to satisfy that need for hunger. So they learn what they have to do to get that satisfied. That increases pleasure or to decrease pain. If the baby is crying because something is hurting, the baby's going to continue to cry, in order to get that pain soothed. Okay? So and these are just small examples. So the ego is there to do these things, to protect us against any threat, the flight or fight. All right? It says the ego that signals that something is happening. What do you do? Also, once again, to increase pleasure and to decrease pain. So let's look at what some of those defense mechanisms are. So basically, it's used in response to feelings of anger, fear, or stress. These defense mechanisms can basically camouflage our reality. So the idea with a defense mechanism, it protects us. We have self-esteem, we have a self-concept that we are trying to protect. Right? Sometimes we don't want to recognize the reality that exists, because if we recognize a reality that exists, then that can impact our self-concept in a negative way. Okay? So we go into overprotection can be dangerous when we're trying to overprotect this fragile self-concept, this fragile ego, or this fragile self-esteem. We start to use defense mechanisms because we don't want to accept the reality of what is actually happening. And that's what we call unhealthy ego. So let's look at what this looks like. All right, moving on. So here you have several defense mechanisms. There actually are a lot more, but we're going to just go over a few. So denial is a refusal to admit. All right, so if there's something that's happening that has happened, and maybe it's your fault, but you refuse to admit it. You refuse to admit that this happened because of you. That protects your self-concept. Repression, removal of thoughts and memories. So here the idea is that someone that, for an example, has been through something traumatic, we just talked about trauma during the last class, they will actually repress those feelings or repress those thoughts and memories to the extent where those memories are no longer present. All right? And what happens sometimes, for an example, like if someone has been sexually abused, especially if it's chronic, they will repress it, and it becomes so repressed that once again the memory does not exist. But then they may go to therapy years later, and then through that therapy, those memories start to actually relive themselves. Projecting is attributing one's own thoughts and feelings onto others. Okay, and I'm going to give you some examples of all of these. Displacement is transferring emotional pain. So I might displace my pain on someone else. I might be mad at this thing. I might be mad at something that happened at work, but I'm going to actually put that onto something or somebody else. Rationalization is interpretation of reality or reinterpretation of reality. Sometimes we rationalize our behaviors. Well, the reason why I did this was because. The reason why I had to cuss her out was because if I didn't cuss her out, then she would have. And humor is a perception of something that's funny, and humor is actually a defense mechanism. Sometimes you've met people, or you might meet someone, they always have something funny to say. Sometimes what that does, it shields them and it keeps the attention off of themselves or their own flaws. So they may use humor to protect themselves. If they can make you laugh about all these other things, you're not focused on their flaws. Or even like for an example, there are comedians who have dealt with significant trauma, lots of family history that has not been they don't have good family history, right? They've had traumatic experiences, dysfunctional families. And in their comedy routines, they'll talk about it in a funny way, but they're actually talking about what happened in their family. But the humor is the way to protect that painful memory and experience. Just a cute cartoon. My psychiatrist put me in touch with reality. And I'd like you to back me up a little. So I guess he wants the psychiatrist to back him up with the reality that probably isn't really the reality. All right. So, do you use defense mechanisms? Let's see. Scenario: a student who experienced a traumatic breakup during their freshman year may completely forget key details about the relationship or avoid thinking about it altogether. Even when friends mention their ex or places they used to go together, the student feels indifferent or is unable to recall the memory or the moment. Which defense mechanism is this? All right, did you get it right? It's repression. Repression helps them cope with the emotional pain by kind of once again pushing down that unpleasant memory out of their conscious awareness. And though it still impacts their behavior, they have still repressed the memory itself. All right, example two. Student who fails a test might say, the professor must have graded it wrong. I know I did better than this, rather than accepting that they didn't prepare well enough. Which defense mechanism do you think this is? Denial, right? Denying that it wasn't that the professor graded it wrong, but that they did not prepare for the test. So by saying it's the professor, it protects their own self-concept. Scenario: a college student who was frustrated after receiving harsh criticism from their professor might go back to the dorm and snap at their roommate for leaving dishes in the sink. Which defense mechanism is this? Displacement. They're displacing their anger from what happened at school onto their roommates. Scenario: a college student is overwhelmed with assignments and exams, might joke, at this point, I'm just trying to pass with dignity instead of expressing their stress directly. Can you figure out which one this is? Humor. All right. So, what is the problem? Is there really a problem with defense mechanisms? Yes. It distorts reality. There's a failure to take accountability for your actions. And if you don't take accountability for your actions, you can't change what you don't know. You can't change what you don't acknowledge. If you don't acknowledge that you didn't do well on that test because you didn't prepare, then you're going to continue to fail tests. But if you acknowledge that, you know what, hey, I'm going to take responsibility that I had this test that I did not prepare for. Now you know the next time I'm going to take more time to prepare for this test. So these are some of the problems with defense mechanisms. So how do you groom a healthy ego? What does this look like, right? Meditate. Meditate daily. And you might say, well, what does meditation have to do with a healthy ego? Because meditation puts you in a state of being. It puts you in a state of being, and it puts you in a state of awareness. A lot of times it's easy for us to distort reality when we have so many things going on. But when you put yourself in a quiet space, sometimes that quiet space can then really help you to recognize some of and bring some awareness to you because the mind has been quieted. Shift from a me to a we conscious. The ego, anytime, so here's one thing when they say, when you know the ego is operating when you use the word I. Well, she hurt my feelings. Well, she said this. Well, he did that. Well, they did that. Right? So it's about me. Me. A we conscious said, well, what could have caused that person to do that? Why did they react this way towards me? What's going on here? So opposed to me being like it's them, I mean like, oh, you hurt me, I'm now trying to think, well, what happened to you that caused you to react to me that way, right? Like what was underneath that? Practice ego and soul balance. So the soul balance is once again just going deeper within to recognize that people go through things. So how do we have compassion? How do we learn how to say, you know what? I'm sorry. Even if, because a lot of times we can't say I'm sorry because you might say, well, what am I sorry for? I didn't do nothing wrong. When you go deep within your soul, it's like, you know what? I'm sorry. I am sorry if I made you feel that way. Because a lot of times we tend to fight with people. Well, I didn't mean this. I mean, I didn't mean, I said that, but I mean, I wasn't trying to hurt your feelings. Or instead of saying, you know what, my intent was not to hurt your feelings. And if I did hurt your feelings, I am so sorry. That is healthy ego when we can recognize that. That even though somebody did you wrong, and you might think, well, they did me wrong. It's like, I'm sorry, because maybe there's something I did that I'm not aware of. Okay? Practice the art of forgiveness. All right. So when we can begin to forgive people, then we start being in a space of a healthy ego. Learn to laugh at yourself. So yep, child, I ain't do well on that test because I ain't study. Right? And it's all good. The next time I'm going to do better. But everything don't have to be so serious. It's okay to be like you take accountability for your actions and learn to live in the present moment. Right? So a lot of times our ego comes into place because we're always thinking about the past or the present. And when we're thinking about the past, then we're trying to protect that thing, those harmful, those things in the past that didn't feel good. So you go into protection mode. So being in the present, or even like for an example, you might be with a friend or even with your mate, and then your mate does something and you're like, see, you always do that. Remember 2 years ago? No, be in the present. Be in the present, because sometimes we stay in the past so much that past, the pain keeps on building up. And when the pain keeps on building up, now the ego has to protect itself. And then we go into fight mode. We go into blame mode. You did this. And remember 2 years ago, you cheated on me, or whatever the case may be. Or 3 years ago, you stopped talking to me. And now, we go, let me just stay present. We had this argument, yep, 2 years ago, you stopped talking to me, but right now, you stopped talking to me for whatever reason, but we're here today, so let's try to move on. Let's try to understand what happened, and let's move on. Okay? All right, ego check. Respond, don't react. All right, respond and give me 1 second. I'm sorry. Okay. Respond, don't react. So the book says this: when expectations are not met, it's a common practice behavior to react with an outburst, perhaps profanity, or even a rude hand gesture, or some other less than ideal behavior. Take the high road and learn to respond instead. Respond means pausing, perhaps counting to 10, taking a deep breath, and practicing composure. The ego reacts, the soul responds. Take the high road. Okay? Excellent advice. All right. Viktor Frankl, A Search for Life's Meaning. So here's another theorist that looks at the psychology from the soul. Let's get started. Victor says the concept, he looks at this idea that we have to, there's a search for meaning, search for what does life mean to us. So while we are here on this earth, if there's no meaning for us, then there's no passion, there's no, you know, there's no drive because there's no meaning, right? So he says there's this concept called logotherapy, where it's the idea that you begin to search for meaning of life. Some fundamental questions that somebody might ask themselves is, why am I here? What does life truly mean to me? Do I know my true purpose in life? These are some fundamental questions that we can ask ourselves so that we can be grounded. If you have no meaning to life, if you don't know why you're here, if you don't know why you wake up every day and push, then that's where people become depressed. They feel empty inside. He also talked about the concept of tragic optimism. Here, he says that we can actually find meaning and value in the worst situations. The fundamental question is, how do I turn my pain into purpose? Many of the organizations that exist because people have turned their pain into purpose. Like, for an example, MAD, which is Mothers Against Drunk Driving. That initiative was started a long time ago because a mother lost her child to a drunk driver. So she started this nonprofit called MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, where they begin to educate people about about drinking and driving. So a lot of things people do, cancer foundations, autism awareness, all those different types of things are typically birthed because someone has been through something that has been painful, their child, a parent, a best friend, a spouse, and they say, you know what, I think that there's a purpose for me here. How do I educate people about HIV awareness, protecting themselves? And even if they get HIV, how do I, teach people, for an example, how to live, that you can still live a healthy life? Cancer survivors, okay? Lupus Foundation. Many of these things, once again, are started because of people's experience with them. And then he talked about the concept of no dynamics, right? That motivates one to find meaning to life. So basically, he's saying that what happens is that people get into this state where they're bored and that there's tension. So they might be angry, they might be sad, whatever the case may be, they're kind of in this state of like, what am I doing here? Like, I'm bored, I need something else. So I've already accomplished this. What next? So he says it's kind of like this spiritual dynamic that's working within you to kind of say, okay, where do I go from here? What's the next level? This might be an example of somebody that has a midlife crisis. So, they have accomplished many things. They have their career, you know, Family life might be good. Maybe children have left the house. They're empty nesters. So what happens is they get to a point where it's like, okay, well, what next? Like my career is great. My kids are grown. Like what next? What's next? I'm bored. I need something else to accomplish, right? So that can actually be a motivator to finding, to evolve into other areas and levels for your life. So those fundamental questions. What are you going to do with your life right now? Where are you heading from here? From this point right here? Or what new contributions can you make to humanity? So these are some fundamental questions that somebody might ask who is in this stage of life. All right, moving on to our last theorist, Dwayne Dyer. I just renamed. Well, I'm sorry. His name is Dwayne Dyer. All right, but they have here it's Wayne Dyer. Okay. He talks about the concept of guilt and worry. All right. I'm sorry. I have a training in 5 minutes, so let me try to keep track. Dwayne says the following: both guilt and worry are considered to be wasted emotional energy because they immobilize our thoughts. No amount of guilt will change the past. No amount of worry will change the future. Very, very powerful. Guilt and worry rob us from living in the present moment, a place that many people rarely spend much time. Because a lot of times, we even when you're thinking, you're either worried about something, sometimes, or you're feeling guilty for something. But a lot of times we spend our energy in either guilt or worry. What's going to happen next? Am I going to pass this class? Will I graduate on time? Am I going to get this job? Okay. Okay, really cute. Be fully present in the moment on this side street, Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Very, very cute cartoon. All right. So, how do I handle guilt and worry? He says, reframe your perception. You got to find lessons learned from the past and start strategically planning for the future, which we will do later on in this class. We're going to do some vision boarding because we're going to look at living authentically. We're going to do a deep dive into careers, right? To see what you want to do with your career, understanding the fullness of what your career may look like, right? Setting, doing SMART goals. So these are examples of starting to plan strategically. And then finding lessons learned from the past. In other words, things happen. So am I going to be guilty about what happened in the past, or am I going to learn from it? So one of the things you may have heard of or may not have heard of is the serenity prayer. So the serenity prayer says this: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace. Taking as Jesus did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will. Secondly, so that I may reasonably happy in this life. Be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. The serenity prayer is very, very powerful. Most people, and once again, if you're not religious, you don't have to use the word God. You don't have to use the word Jesus. You may say, some people use the word the Most High, right? So whatever spirituality you have, you don't have to use this word God. You may say to the Most High, the powers that are above me, the powers that oversee my life, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's a very, very powerful prayer that helps us to understand that we cannot be in a state of guilt and worry. It's not going to do anything. People say worrying is like being in a rocking chair because you can't go anywhere. You're in a rocking chair, you do this, but you never go anywhere. Okay? And then the 12 steps. The 12 steps. This is very powerful. The 12 steps is pretty much something that if you are an alcoholic and you go to a 12-step program, these are the 12 steps that they will take you through in the program. All right. Once again, um, they use the word God. If you don't have to use the word God. Whatever your higher spiritual power is, you use that word. And for the 12 steps, although this was crafted for people that are recovering from alcoholism, you can remove the word alcohol. The 12 steps are relevant in everybody's life. It is relevant. So when we think about the concepts of worry and guilt, it says we admit that we are powerless over whatever thing you are powerless over. So you can replace the word alcohol with another word. That our lives have become unmanageable. So that's accountability. Remember, we talked about accountability earlier in the lecture because sometimes we have this ego and these egos don't want us to be accountable. This is saying I'm accountable to this thing that I've been powerless over. That thing might be guilt, it might be worry, it might be shame, it might be depression. It says, I come to believe that a power greater than myself, ourselves, can restore us to sanity. We make decisions to turn over our will and our lives over to the care of God or the higher power that you serve as we understand him or her or they. All right. We made a search. We're searching and we're fearless moral inventory of ourselves. We admit to the high power, to ourselves, and to another human the exact nature of our wrongdoing. So you're taking accountability. We entirely read to have God or the higher power remove our character defects. We humbly asked him, her, or they to remove our shortcomings. Make a list of all persons who have harmed us and become willing to make amends to them. Make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so we should injure them, so that we should not injure them or others. Continue to take a personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admit that we are wrong. You're going to seek through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with the higher power as we understand, praying only for knowledge of his, her, or their will for us and the power to carry that out. And having a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to other persons that don't have to be alcoholics and to practice these principles. Okay, so once again, the 12 steps is very, very powerful. You don't have to be an alcoholic. You don't have to be in substance abuse, because these are powerful, fundamental concepts that help us to take accountability for our action, to help us to surrender to a higher power, to know that there's something above us, something that is above us, that is over our lives, that because we're not it, there's something else there that is more powerful than us, that has our back. And taking accountability for those things that we do, forgiving others, not hurting others because of the things that we've been through. The 12 steps, this is a perfect thing that basically takes all of what we said in this lecture, which is learning to have healthy ego, not having an unhealthy ego, not living in guilt and worry, living from our soul. This perfectly summarizes this. Thank you for listening.